welcome in to another classic episode of the Picture Show Podcast, the world's most consistent movie podcast, Bryn. We're always uploading, aren't we?
All the time. And if you're not seeing it, you're just missing out. It's
Look
there.
harder. Look harder. All right, well, we're finally back. We're going to talk about some of this year's most notable films. And today the theme we thought of is tales about sexuality and bald Eastern European men. So we're here to chat about Sean Baker's Anora, which has been one of the most acclaimed films of the year since coming out at Cannes and winning the Palme d'Or, and Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, the third Nosferatu film, and something I've been waiting for quite a few years, that I was finally able to see. Very excited about it. And I'm just excited to finally be getting back into it, Bryn.
Me too. It's been a couple of months now since we've last recorded, but I think the wait is worth it. The movies that we're talking about today, I've been so excited for them. I'm a little late to the party on Anora. I just watched that one recently, but Nosferatu I've been waiting for all year. I was so excited. I went and saw it on Christmas. I've never gone and seen a movie on Christmas, so this was a first for me, but it was so good. It was everything I wanted and more. So I'm really excited to get into both of these.
Yeah. And I think we're going to start with Anora. It's one of the most talked about movies of the year. It's got some of the best performances, one of the funniest scripts. It's just one of the hallmark films of 2024. Anora is about a young stripper at a high-profile club in New York City, and she's able to speak a little bit of Russian, pretty poorly, but because of this she is put in contact with a Russian client at the club, who turns out to be the son of extremely wealthy Russian people, and they have this whirlwind romance until about halfway through the film, when her Prince Charming runs away and everything comes crashing down, and Anora has to figure out how to put it all back together again. It's one of the most unique and creative films of the year. It takes course over about a week. I guess where I want to start first with this one is just talking about Mikey Madison herself, and what she brings to this role. Do you have anything you want to say about Mikey Madison, Bryn, in this movie?
If I didn't know anything about her going into this, I would have thought that they had found an exotic dancer and hired her for this role, because the realism that she brings to this, she pulls this character out, and it is so three-dimensional, and you just get this very realistic look at somebody who would come from, that lifestyle. She does such a fantastic job. There's so much energy in her performance. It is so chaotic and confident and angry and messy, and I couldn't get enough of her. I loved her.
Yeah, she plays this character with a ton of sensitivity, and when you first meet her in this movie, you kind of see that there's a lot of cunning there. She knows how to flash a winning smile and say her killer lines to get kind of whatever she wants. We see the street smarts, we see the savviness, but we also see that there's not a huge code of honor with her. We meet her and she's giving a dance to another dancer's primary client or something there, but we see that Anora is looking out for herself, probably because no one else is or has, and all of that is given to us in such a natural way through the start of this film in the strip club, where she's going around talking with clients and other dancers. You just get so much from so little, just because her performance is just so full of life.
She is so sharp and she's so intelligent, but she also kind of balances that with this borderline unhealthy level of skepticism. Every person she interacts with, you can tell she does not trust them as far as she could throw them. And you see that even more so come into play once she actually meets with this client who speaks almost solely Russian. Her entire first interaction with him, you can tell she is just trying to get a read on him, and she doesn't trust a thing he's saying, and she's just trying to kind of gauge what her role in that situation is, in that relationship, because all she knows is that he's a high-profile client, he's going to pay a lot of money, but she doesn't really know the extent.
Yeah, and man, the kid playing Vanya, this young Russian heir that she falls for, or so to speak, that she meets, he's so funny. He's just unbelievably funny in this role. He's just this goofy 19-year-old kid with no worries at all. I mean, like, you can just see someone that's had everything kind of given to him. He's just really cutting loose, and it's a really stark contrast to Anora, who's just really scrappy and really savvy, and she's just really easily enticed by his energy and his seemingly endless ability to just pay for anything and get what he wants. And it's easy to be intoxicated by it because the performance is great. He's super funny, but he makes her some offers she can't really refuse, and before we know it, she's gone to this massive mansion overlooking the river. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, originally she goes over there because he is paying for, we'll say, additional services.
Kind of a Pretty Woman type deal.
Yeah. And so after a couple times of visiting the mansion, and she ends up getting invited to a New Year's Eve party, and she brings her friend along, and it's this great, grand time. Like, it is like the most grandiose of parties. And so she ends up staying the night. She oversleeps. She's, kind of rushing to get out of bed the next day because she's got to go to work. And all of a sudden he makes this huge offer that if she, pretends to be his girlfriend for the week, that he'll pay her like 10 grand. And she barters for 15, and he accepts it without even like arguing. And she's like, I would have done it for 10. And he said, if I were you, I wouldn't have accepted less than 30. And so it kind of paints this picture of like, it is this endless pot of money. And so I think that is very enticing for her, because to her, that's not a lot of work for that much money. And so she just gets to live this grand life for a week and get paid a ton of money for it. They end up going to Vegas, which is where he ends up proposing to her, more or less. And I think that this is kind of where we dip back into that heavy skepticism that she has.
Yeah, there's a great negotiation about the ring that you just have to see.
And it's a good 2-minute long scene of her saying I don't believe you. You don't really want that. He's like, yes, I do.
Yeah, that's just some fantastic stuff. Once they get to Vegas, the film takes off and it starts really rushing, and it's extremely exciting. It's easy to see how Anora gets swept in it, because at that point in the film, we're really getting swept up in the grandeur and the possibility and the fun. And then they have their fun, they seal their union, and they return to New York. And then we're introduced to some Armenians who are responsible for handling young Vanya while he's in the United States. And when they come calling at the house, Vanya sort of unceremoniously takes up and leaves, which leaves Anora to deal with these goons she knows nothing about, and this fairy tale comes crashing down, and the whole film takes a turn. Maybe we don't want to get too much into what happens into the back half of this film, but it's a lot, and the way the film builds up to this point to steer us in a completely different direction is certainly something, certainly unique.
Absolutely. I mean, up until that point, it all feels very fast-tracked. It feels very rushed. And I think it kind of very much sets you up for this realistic idea of you're like, this feels a little fast, this feels a little bit much right off the bat. And that's because it is. It really is this fairy tale that she lives for a couple weeks, and then it explodes just as fast as it took off, And it just turns into very much this chaotic, wild goose chase. And the whole time you're kind of watching it happen, you feel pretty uncomfortable. You feel a little bit of secondhand embarrassment for how they are behaving while they're searching for him, and kind of how she's being treated, but also how she's talking back to people. And I just think that's where you get a very real feel for what a situation like this would actually look like.
Yeah, and it can't be said enough that especially the first half of this film is a riot. This film is super, super funny. Anora, the namesake of the film, obviously is a huge part of it, and she is great. She is super, super funny. But this film has this incredible ensemble cast, and as intoxicating as that first half is, when the goons show up in the second half, there's almost like a Three Stooges element to it, in a more realistic fashion. But you have this Armenian, is he a priest or he's a pastor or he's something?
Something.
And he's in the middle of some serious religious business and gets called away to handle Vanya. And you can just see like the money this family has is sort of all consuming for anyone in their orbit. And then he's got sort of a lackey that's actually a really famous Armenian comedian, and he makes a lot out of his little screen time. He's super, super funny, a great complainer, one of the great on-screen complainers of recent times.
To be fair, the man's nose gets broken.
It gets broken pretty bad, but he's kind of asking for it. But I really want to give my biggest of shout-outs to the actor Yura Borisov. Earlier I was talking about our bald Eastern European man. He is our bald Eastern European in Anora, and he's just this fantastic actor. He was in one of my favorite films of 2021 called Compartment Number 6. Everyone should go see it. But in this film, he's just sort of a brute enforcer, kind of tough Russian guy, goon, until you really get to meet him. And he's really just this sweet guy. You don't know how he ends up in this situation, but the connection that he forms with Anora in the back half of this film, through very little words, mostly through glances and unseen gestures, is really beautiful. And I think his performance is one of the standouts of this film in a big ensemble.
Absolutely. And I love this character so much because no matter what Anora does to him in this movie, he's just kind of gentle about everything. Just kind of lets it happen. At one point she bites him, and that's not his favorite thing, but he just sits there and he holds her. And
he can understand.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't hold it against.
He's like, I'm holding her so she doesn't go anywhere. And they're like, why are you doing that? He's like, because she'll go somewhere. She'll leave, He's just very, calm about it. So then, they're in the car and they're looking for Vanya, and he's just trying to make small talk with her. Like, is that a real mink coat? And she's like, fuck off. I hate you. And he just keeps going with it. They're like, stop talking to her. And he's like, I'm just talking. It's fine. And so he's just very much almost this gentle presence throughout the movie. The least chaotic character in the entire movie.
Yeah, he's like the heart of the movie. He pops up and he's like the heart of it.
Yep.
Because he's kind of the only person that's looking at what Anora is going through. Most people in this movie are concerned about Vanya, and he's kind of the only person that's really looking at Anora and seeing her. There's a scene of him looking at her on the plane, and there's just so much tenderness, and it's totally against what you see. But it's a totally wonderful performance, and he's funny and he's heartbreaking, and it's super fascinating to watch. He's a fantastic character.
My favorite scene is right at the end of the movie. They are sitting in his car. He's finally dropping her back off at her old apartment, and at one point she goes, "This car is very you," and he goes, "Do you like it?" She says, "No." And his only response is, "It's my grandma's."
And the look on poor Anora's face. She's got so much bite. She's got such a shell around her, and the movie really shakes Anora up.
Yeah.
She is an actual survivor. There is some genuine, naivete there. She desperately doesn't want any responsibility There's a part in the film where early on, like she can't even pick up milk on the way home like she's supposed to. She's just allergic to it. She doesn't want it, and the allure of Vanya and the life that he could provide is so intoxicating. Just like the first half of this film.
And when it really comes down to it, you have these two characters in their early 20s. He's 21, she's 23. I mean, and that's just kind of naivete that comes from being young. You know, when you're at that stage in your life, everything feels like it could be a fairy tale. Like everything feels like it is feasible, it's possible.
And it does feel like they like each other.
Yeah.
It has to be said that, like, when it begins, it seems like there's a lot of genuine like there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I guess I can also feel the ulterior motives of both people. And it's just very interesting. So when everything does kind of fall away, like, I was genuinely surprised, I think, by the way the second half of this film went. Because you want things to work out a certain way. Sean Baker is just not shy to, I guess, to tackle things in a way that feels very real, and sometimes there's not resolution where you think there would be, and that's just kind of a part of life. And I think a lot of this film, I think a lot of Anora is about class, of course, and it's just interesting because there's bad motivations and there's all these things on both sides, but Honora would have to do everything absolutely perfect to get anywhere close to where this family is. And this young kid can basically go on an absolute tear and you know, potentially ruin a girl's life, and it really doesn't matter. You know, his family has whatever it takes to just pay, you know, whoever off. And it's really fascinating because you think things are going to go one way, and I think it resists a lot of sentimentality, and it resists a lot of easy ways out and giving people what they want. It's just really fascinating for that. And a really honest, frank look at sex work. And, like, I think just the way people are now about things like this. It's just a really frank and satisfying look at these things.
Definitely. I mean, it completely breaks away from the typical cinematic storyline of, you know, at some point you expect him to speak up to try to defend their marriage and their relationship, and he doesn't. And I think that that is much more realistic to his character's type of, this is suddenly not, it stopped being fun. So I'm going to let my parents handle this, and I'm not going to get involved anymore. And it's heartbreaking to watch her fight so hard for effectively like 24 hours. She is fighting tooth and nail to try to make this work. And you finally get to the point where she finds him and is able to talk to him. And he's like, actually, I am going to go. We are getting divorced. I don't want this anymore. And you just like, you're kind of right there with her, like the rug gets pulled out from underneath you, and you're like, oh, that is probably what would happen. It's not what you were expecting, but it is probably what would happen.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating the way the film unfolds, and a lot of it is just due to how compelling Mikey Madison is as Honora. Like, she is, it can't be overstated, like, she's just wonderful. And I've seen a lot of people complain about maybe a lack of character growth or something from Honora, which first of all, she's just a beautifully stylized character by Mikey Madison. But I think the very end of this film is such a massive personal breakthrough for a character that, like, yeah, for the most part, you are just kind of seeing her over the course of a couple weeks, and we're just kind of getting to know who this person is. But I think there's a ton of development at the very end of this film. Should we give a quick spoiler alert and maybe talk about the very end of this film? Do you want to?
Absolutely, because in the same way that it doesn't follow the natural storyline progression, normally you would expect, yes, there to be some kind of character growth. You see these people, you see their flaws, you wait for growth to happen, and it doesn't come. But that's realistic for the time span of a couple of weeks. People are not going to change in a couple of weeks. It just doesn't happen. You're not going to learn that much over the course of 2 weeks with somebody. And so I think for her character to remain consistent in how she behaves, how she reacts to things, how she speaks, that's a very realistic look at that. I think it very much is made evident in the last scene of the film. Igor, our favorite bald Eastern European, is helping her get back to her apartment, and she is just kind of having this moment of, this person is going out of their way to help me and doesn't want anything from me, and that's shocking to her because all she knows is transactional relationships in any capacity. There's always been money involved or acts of service, something. And so for somebody to just be doing something out of the kindness of their heart or because they care is so foreign to her. And so, she ends up coming on to him, and in the middle of it, she panics, and he just holds her, and she just kind of breaks down crying. And I think it's because she's finally realizing that there are people who just genuinely want to help her and be there for her, and they're not asking for anything in return.
Yeah, it's a really stark and sobering ending, because the movie is pretty fun, and then this ending just hits like a ton of bricks. It's so real and so honest and true, and it's such a huge moment for Anora as a person, and I do mostly look on it in a hopeful sort of manner, but it is so sad because I think this one person who really wants to connect with her, the one person, like I was saying, who's really looking at her and thinking about her needs in this movie, her connection with him could maybe be ruined by this act. Like, she just doesn't know another way to be, and this way that she's had to survive has sort of ruined maybe the way she can really be truly intimate and vulnerable with people. And in that moment, she just really comes crashing down, and the fact that I think she can show that vulnerability and he does embrace her, I think is really beautiful. But it's a really sad ending, because we should say that the first half of this movie does have a good amount of sex in it. The movie is not shy about the world that it's in, but something that's, I think, really interesting about it is the almost complete lack of intimacy in any of the scenes.
Still transactional.
And it's transactional and it's funny.
Yeah.
But it is just, it is what it is, and it doesn't feel like a married couple or anything like that. And so I think just to bring things back in that last scene to such a stark moment, it's a really brave and memorable ending. One of the biggest, I think, swings and hits of the year. I know that my screening at the theater was just stunned silence for a good little bit as the credits started to roll. But I think Sean Baker has done a phenomenal job with this film. I don't think it's a perfect film. I think I had higher expectations for it, and I do think I liked his past two features a little bit more than this. Red Rocket, which I think was one of the great films of this decade so far, and The Florida Project, which is one of the great films of the last decade. I do think this film kind of slides in just under those, but it's undoubtedly one of the best films of the year. Even so, yeah, what do you think of Anora, Bryn?
I completely agree. I loved it. There were definitely parts that kind of lost me. I think they spent a little bit too much time focused on the time span of trying to find him, which realistically is over the course of a night, but it takes so much time out of the movie. It kind of lost me a little bit. I think it kind of bordered on too much. But at the same time, I think it was balanced out. I found the ending very rewarding, and I think that it's probably tough for some audiences, like you said, like they're not seeing growth from the character throughout the movie. But you get all of that growth crammed into about a minute and a half. And it's her realizing that she can have relationships outside of what she can do for somebody else. And we talked about that kind of growth a little bit when we talked about Titan, because that character also has that sort of realization in her, final weeks. She is starting to realize that, oh, love can exist outside of what I can do for somebody else. And so I think that it's an atypical look at the kind of realistic growth that somebody is going to experience.
Yeah. I can't recommend this film enough. What would you rate it? What would you rate Anora?
Since I just saw it so recently, I think I'm still working on a rating. If I had to say I was working on one right now, I'd say I'd probably put it at about 3 stars. I really did enjoy it, but I can't say it was my favorite, but I thought it was good. I definitely recommend watching it. It's not going to be for everybody. I really enjoyed it, but I can also see where it's going to fall flat with some audiences.
I definitely liked it a lot more than you. I can't wait to add it to my collection and watch it again. I really, really love Mikey Madison and Yura Borisov, and I think the script is fantastic, and there's an incredible 20-minute home invasion sequence that just has to be seen. I'd probably give this like a 4.5 out of 5.
Really?
I really enjoyed this. This is one of my favorite movies of the year, if not my favorite. I will say, I don't think 2024 has been the best overall year for movies. We'll get into that at a later point. But I still think that this is one of the highlights of the year.
I can't argue with that.
Well, that is one bald Eastern European down, Bryn.
And unfortunately, it's going to take a hard left turn, although that's the parallel. We're going to take a hard left turn to talk about the other movie of this episode, which is Nosferatu. I absolutely loved this movie. The 1922 Nosferatu is still one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Everything about it works for me. I think it is still one of the most unsettling, creepiest films I've ever seen. Part of that is the style. Part of that is just, the technology of the time making a Gothic horror movie is just creepy.
Really effective.
I thought that this version captured that so well. It has transferred beautifully. The whole time I was watching it, I felt like I was in a waking nightmare. It was phenomenal. Some of the best cinematography I've seen in a long time.
The look of this film is utterly entrancing. There's so much natural light. Specifically, I want to say there's an early on scene in a rural inn, only lit by fire, that is just entrancing.
And shortly after that, there is a scene where one of the central characters is walking through the woods on his way to the castle, and everything about that scene is picturesque. It is this dark, blue-hued tone, and there's snow falling, and he is walking down this road, and there's a crossroad that sets it up to look like a crucifix. It's absolutely stunning to look at, and it is so simplistic. And the whole time I was sitting there, I was watching the scene play out, and it felt like how I experience nightmares. And I've never been able to describe one of my nightmares, but that was it. And it was absolutely stunning. So anyway, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was blown away by this movie. It was so beautiful. If you're not familiar with Nosferatu, it is, it's a different take on the classic Dracula story, more focused on the demonic lore behind Dracula, about this creature that lives off of the life essence of others.
And brings plagues.
And brings plagues.
Can't forget those plagues.
How could you forget the plagues? And as the lore goes, there is only, one person, one woman who can stop this demon. And so the way that it is set up, you have Count Orlok, or Nosferatu, who is played by Bill Skarsgård, who does just knocked it out of the park. Not that I was surprised.
Completely disappears.
This man was made for horror. And then you have Lily Rose Depp, who gave my favorite performance of the year. She was stunning. And so their two characters are kind of interlocked. She's been having these dreams since she was a child about this entity coming to visit her. And as you're seeing clips of these dream sequences, it feels very sensual. It feels very intimate. But there's also something so deeply unsettling about it. And that whole tone is carried throughout the movie. So her new husband is trying to get in with this realty firm, essentially. And they have this task for him to go visit a count out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere.
Transylvania, which is a remote area of Romania nestled within the Carpathian Mountains.
Yes. But the castle is in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, Transylvania. That's on the map. Look it up.
Yeah, it's a bit out of the way.
It is.
A bit out of the way.
So he is getting ready to go on this trip, and she's saying, don't go, you're gonna die. You won't come back if you leave me. And he's like, it's fine, this is the only way for us to, get our own house and for us to live the life that we want. And, so he goes off on this 6-week adventure to Transylvania. And the whole time he's there, she's having fits and visions, and she's essentially coming across as possessed. And the people that she's staying with, they're very good friends, don't know what to do for her. They end up seeking the help of this kind of occult professor who is more or less obsessed with these sorts of, not fairy tales, but
supernatural things, the occult.
Yeah,
the occult.
Yeah. And meanwhile, her husband is trapped in this castle because even after Count Orlok signs the contracts for the property that he wants, he also kind of tricks this individual into selling his wife's soul for money. And so now he's stuck in this castle, and this demon is sucking the life essence out of him every night. And this, again, feels very sexualized. Every time you see these...
it's very violating.
It is. And it makes you feel gross. But also you're so intrigued.
The actual vampirism scenes in this are so, visceral. They're so, squelchy and crunchy. And it's just, such a good take on the vampire thing. I love it.
And it really is. And it's intentionally sexualized because that is what makes you so uncomfortable while it's happening. This is not the type of horror that gets you with jump scares. But it is this, longing dread throughout the whole thing. And when you're seeing it happen, it is not, the typical, something bad is going to happen. Something bad is happening the entire time. The bad never stops.
Yeah, it feels like we're always kind of heading toward, a tragic outcome. It feels there's this despair in the film. But the sexualization is really interesting, though. I think that vampires have often symbolized, desire and feelings of otherness and things like that. But what's interesting about Nosferatu is that it's the combination of, that deep desire, but also the fear of disease and all these things. It's a really interesting mix of symbolisms with Nosferatu.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading Bill Skarsgård's narrative on that because, as he was approaching the role, he was kind of talking about that he wanted to make people feel uncomfortable in that way. He said, I want you to think this demon's sexy and feel gross while you're thinking that. And it just, he did a great job. You feel sexualized and you feel gross. At the same time, Anyway, the husband ends up escaping from the castle barely with his life. And he makes it back to his wife, who is appalled that her visions are coming true and all these things. And then Count Orlok arrives and brings the plague with him. rats infest the city and people are dying in the thousands, so quickly it is spreading. And so this whole time they're trying to prevent Count Orlok from finding Ellen, Lily Rose Depp's character, because his whole goal is to find her, kill her.
Consume her entirely.
Yeah. And she kind of hits this realization of the only way that any of this is going to stop is if I sacrifice myself.
Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with the story, the movie is not going to give you anything new. If you're not familiar with any Dracula or Nosferatus, I highly recommend checking this one out, especially if you can see it in a theater. I guess I wish I loved this one more. I had really high expectations for it. I think where Robert Eggers excels the most is in the period detail and the occult, the symbolism, and there's something he can really get at with like things like folklore. There's something he hits at that's just really human when it comes to things like that. And I think I just don't love this one as much as I loved The Witch or The Lighthouse. I do think it's a step up from The Northman, but I think maybe there's pacing issues in this one for me or something, but there is a lot to love. I think it's so immersive. The period detail, the feeling of, well, first of all, let's say most of this takes place in Germany in the 1830s, which is already scary. But it looks fantastic. It's really handsomely put together. I think they have an interesting angle in this movie that's a little different from other versions, but I guess I just wish maybe they had gone a little crazier into it, a little darker, a little more, like, I wonder if maybe it was neutered by the studio a bit, because I did feel like they could have honestly gone a little crazier, but at the same time, I'd absolutely watch this again. It's super entertaining. I think we have to talk about the design of Count Orlok, because the vampire imagery in the Nosferatu movies is incredibly famous. We all know the original 1922 from SpongeBob, flicking the lights on and off. Extremely iconic. And no, SpongeBob is not in Nosferatu. Wasted opportunity. In the first Nosferatu, there's something really creepy and almost insectoid about him. Something very alien. And in the 79 one, he's a lot more human. He's very bald, but he's a lot more human, and there's something more tragic about him, You can really see his eyes, and there's a lot of feeling there. And our new version is a really new take, I think. He's still bald. Thank God. He's still bald and Eastern European. Yeah, I don't know, Bryn. What do you think of the new design of the vampire?
So, you're right. It is a completely new take on him, outside of the baldness. But in the two previous versions, the character's face, at least at one point or another, is very visible. It's very plain, put in front of you. It is really hard to get a good look at him in this new movie. Like you said in the 1922 version, he looks very alien. He's got, sort of an enlarged head. He's got these big ears. His eyes are very,
you're very
wide
confronted with him. He's looking right at you.
Which I think was more or less a necessity for that time period, because you had to exaggerate features so much for it to be captured, especially on a darker film that's already in black and white. It's already low light, so you had to exaggerate these features. Not so much in the 1979 version. I think that was more of a product of the 70s. You had more human-looking monsters, which I think for that time it added to sort of the realness, like the real possibility of monsters like that. They could be anybody, But in this new version, you really don't get a good look at his face, maybe more than twice. But he's got these big dark eyes. He's got a huge mustache.
Oh.
Big old
we had to say it.
stash.
There it is. We had to say it. The mustache is amazing. Oh my
Big
God.
old ferret right
When
on the
I
lip.
saw the mustache, because am I correct? The first time you see it is kind of like in the firelight in silhouette, and like I almost stood up and clapped in the theater. Like I was like, what a bold swing! Evil mustache vampire is fantastic because he's kind of like a creepy pedo
Yeah.
creeper in this. Like that's kind of his vibe in this one. Is he's like,
Yeah.
ooh, I'm
Very
gonna
like
I'm gonna
Hunchback
groom this
vibes.
German girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's very
What a fun look, though. I just love the mustache. He's very
I
what?
love the mustache. He's very I'm trying to think of the way to describe him. He's very turtle-like.
Yeah, he's got a weird gait. He's very hunched over.
Yeah.
Do you think the mustache is to hide the teeth? Maybe there's a
Maybe.
practical reason for it.
You know,
Maybe
that's
he's a.
probably a good point.
Yeah. Either way, this is one of the great movie mustaches of all time. I think this is instantly rising up the echelons of movie mustaches. Or
We're gonna
whatever
have
the
to make a
terminology.
mustache
The
tier.
pantheon? The pantheon? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Movie mustache pantheon.
Rank the movie
Tier
mustache.
list. Count
Tier.
Orlok.
Right up
Yeah,
there.
I don't know. I think it's a really fun movie. It takes a lot of big swings. I just this is another thing I have to disagree with you on. I wasn't crazy about Lily Rose Depp in this movie.
Really?
No, and when I read that originally Anya Taylor-Joy had been cast, I got even sadder. Like I just think she would have been a great Ellen, but to me,
She
I
would
like
have.
Lily Rose Depp. There's something just a little lifeless in the delivery. She makes some good acting choices in the possession scenes, and she's really trying things physically, and she's doing some really crazy things with her body in some of them. I guess I just didn't feel super compelled by her. I don't know, I can close my eyes and I can picture someone like Winona Ryder or something in that role and like the film a lot more. And I just don't know what Lily Rose Depp brought to the film, in my opinion. I think she looks great in the film. Like she looks like a real old time German. But I was not compelled by that performance. I really think the best performances in the film are the boss guy who's actually the vampire servant, who has very little time but has a ton of fun. And the guy that Bill Skarsgård as Orlok, who just disappears. But Lily Rose Depp did not move me in this.
Interesting. See, I thought that the sort of lifelessness in her was very convincing for the character because she's been dealing with these visions, with this experience, and people effectively thinking that she's crazy since her childhood. So it's kind of like hollowed her out, left her as a shell. Like she is very much numb at this point because she's dealing with all of these things by herself, and every time she tries to talk to somebody about it, they're like, ooh, you might not want to say that out loud. They're going to bring the straitjacket for you. Like, let's tone it down. And so, like, at this point, like, she just wants someone to hear her. And I think that she is just so numb and really is lifeless from that she doesn't really have anything left to present to society, to the world, I don't know. I thought her performance was very compelling in the way that, like, putting myself in the shoes of somebody who had been dealing with a lifetime of, like, mental torment and not really having a way to get that out or for anybody to understand what you're dealing with. I imagine I'd be a shell of a person too. And, the times when she does experience intense emotion and fear and, like there is a scene, where she is trying to talk to her husband about the dreams that she has and the visions that she has. And
One near the beginning?
No, it's farther into the film where he's made it back from Transylvania, and she's trying to share with him all of these visions that she's had and how she knows that it's inevitable that he is going to get to her. And she's, tearing at her corsets and she's like basically screaming, and her face, there's a part where her face contorts and her eyes roll back into her head and her tongue is like sticking out at weird angles. And just that whole sequence was mind-blowing to me. I thought that she did so well in that scene, and that was kind of what sold me on it. But I thought she gave a phenomenal performance in that movie, as did a lot of the other characters. Willem Dafoe, not that it's surprising, loved him.
He's always having fun. He's kind of like Van Helsing. He's like the Van Helsing character. He's super fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed him. I always enjoy him though, so just knowing that he was in it, I thought Nicholas Hoult did a great job.
He's honestly a really good actor. I'm glad that he's starting to get more roles like this. I haven't seen Juror Number 2 yet, but he's leading that new Clint Eastwood movie, so good for Nicholas Hoult, because he is a really gifted actor, and he is super good in this.
The cinematography was phenomenal. Not that this is Robert Eggers' first time working with Jaron Blaschke, but just knocked it out of the park again.
Yeah.
And stylistically, I also thought it varied from The Lighthouse. So I was just really happy to see variety. You can still see hints of the style, but it was
just
still
beautiful
different enough.
lighting. Like, it just looks real. There's so much depth to the image and so many good choices.
But it's also so dreamlike.
Yeah. I think maybe sometimes the image is a little too neat and clean, I guess, for me. I can just think of a couple establishing shots that look a little too neat and clean for me. But
that's fair.
It is just a really beautiful and immersive film. It's something I'd absolutely watch again, primarily for all the Orlok scenes, just because he's super, super fascinating up on the screen, even when you can barely see him and they conceal him in so many clever ways. But the way his voice emanates around you in the theater is like really, really satisfying and really worth it.
Yes. The way he rolls his R's with every single word tickles something in my brain. I was like, ah.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. The performance. I guess I don't love it as much as I love the 1922.
I don't know that I'll love any version as much as I love the 1922 version, but I feel like this was the closest that we've come to being able to like almost restore that movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
it has this real old school feeling. It's going for a lot of the like playing with shadows, and like you can see the affection it has for the movies that came before it. I do see that.
It very much upholds the Gothic horror, like it's not quite like film noir. It's not, it's its own category, but it's not the horror that you expect out of modern film now. It is very much true to the Gothic horror style, and I have such a soft spot in my heart for that, and I feel like it was just executed so beautifully.
Yeah. Fair enough. Do you have anything else to say about it, Bryn, or do you have a rating?
5 stars. It was an immediate 5 stars for me.
It's fantastic. That's like a 3.5 stars for me. I still really enjoyed it. I'd see it again, and I would recommend it. But I'd rather watch The Witch or The Lighthouse. But it's better than The Northman.
Listen, The Witch is also really high up there. I loved The Witch.
I'm The Witch's biggest fan. So underrated.
The Witch fan club over here.
Yeah, we love the Vivitch.
This podcast endorses
a couple of
The
hot
Witch.
Vivitches over here. Another classic, Bryn. Another classic picture show podcast.
This is what the people have been waiting for.
Oh, clamoring. All 16 of you.
Hey, you know what? We wouldn't keep doing it if it weren't for the 16 of you. So
Yeah. I do it mostly to hear myself yap. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Socials, as always, will be on the screen. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on YouTube. Maybe we'll make a Patreon someday. I don't know.
Someday. In the meantime, you can tune in for our next episode where we talk about 2 other fantastic movies from this year. But you'll have to stay tuned to see which ones those are. Until then, watch a great movie and tell your friends about it, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.